Well, it's about time we finally take Abe Lincoln off our currency, the U.S. currency, because for the same reason, except more so with Abe Lincoln, that they're demanding that Andrew Jackson be taken off the currency. I'm actually going to present some actual true historical facts. Unlike the propaganda coming out of Hollywood and the movie industry, I know that recently, God, every time I look at a movie now, the Confederate flag is named, shown as some of the worst people in the world, associated with some of the worst people in the world. And we're going to dispel some myths and get on with some information about Abe Lincoln, the supposed great emancipator. That's what his reputation is. But the reality of the situation, this guy was a complete racist, a fraud. He was somebody who suspended habeas corpus, the rights of citizens, even in the North. He was somebody that imposed later on, pushed for the income tax, direct tax on income, which was later declared unconstitutional. But also, he's been somebody that's committed atrocities against American Indians, too, particularly the tribe of Lakota. That's something they accuse Andrew Jackson of, which, it's true, but, I could tell you about pretty much all these people are in the same light, and no matter what leader you put out there. But I think Abe Lincoln is one of your worst leaders going. He's one of your worst presidents going. Um, it's interesting that JFK, John F. Kennedy, came 100 years later and was also assassinated. There's been a lot of associations between John F. Kennedy and Abe Lincoln, but I do not put John F. Kennedy in the same league as Abe Lincoln. I think John F. Kennedy was a true emancipator, somebody for the people and for civil rights. Abe Lincoln definitely was not. Um, in 1862, he was the one that actually perpetrated the biggest federal mass execution that ever occurred. And up to that time and since that time, the Lakota 38, for rebelling against oppressive things that were being done to them, being removed from their lands, being forced to live on reservations, starving, and part of the punishment for the rebellion was a mass hanging of 38 Lakota, ordered by President Abe Lincoln. Now, let me get on to some of the things that Abe Lincoln, which we see on our currency, we see him on our 5, and we see him on our penny, along with "In God We Trust," which is so, so much hypocrisy when it's his image is on that with "In God We Trust." But let me set the record straight. Here's a quote, and there's many quotes by Abe Lincoln. Also, Abe Lincoln, if you look on YouTube, you can find some. It's probably somewhat difficult to find these videos, and they're not pro-Confederate videos; they're historical videos. Abe Lincoln was also a homosexual that slept with men. He was he was married, but he slept with men as much as he possibly could when he was away from his wife. So here's a quote from Abe Lincoln. This was from a debate 2 years before he got elected, and this is per Abe Lincoln. He's stating, "I am not, nor have ever been in favor of bringing about in any way the social and political equality of the white and black race. I am not, nor have ever been in favor of making jurors of Negroes, nor qualifying them to hold office, nor to intermarry with white people. And I will say in addition to this, that there's a physical difference between the white and black races, which I believe will ever forbid the two races living together on terms of social and political equality." Then Abe Lincoln goes on further to state in this debate, "And insomuch as they cannot live together, while they do remain together, they must be in a position of superior and inferior." He's actually setting and the course for segregation in the South. Per Abe Lincoln, he's arguing for segregation. He's saying that they must live in a position of superior and inferior, and insomuch as at any man I'm in favor of having the superior position assigned to the white race. This is per Abe Lincoln, September 18th, 1858, 2 years before, the hotly contested election of 1860, where there's a four-way race, and Abe Lincoln actually got the ballot on the ballot I think after multiple um, votes by the electorate that put him in power to be run for actually political office in the first place. But he is actually a racist, Abe Lincoln. It's like the whole thing that they said about him since he died or since he was assassinated, it's all been perpetuated upon a myth. It's not just he was a racist against the black people, he was a racist against the American Indians, which is evident by the largest mass hanging of the Lakota. 38 hung by orders of President Abe Lincoln, 1862. This is while the Civil War was going on. Now, why did he actually go about and say he wanted to free the slaves? Now, he did not free the slaves, though, in any of the states that he had control over. For instance, in Missouri, Kentucky, Delaware, and Maryland, and also West Virginia, which was not actually a state, it was starting to become a state. It was a loose confederation of counties. Slavery, he did not touch the institution of slavery at all. The Emancipation Proclamation, which was something he just decreed. Why did he decree it? He decreed it in an attempt to format rebellion by the blacks in the South. He did not do it to free the slaves. Yeah, it said he stated to free the slaves, but the whole purpose of it was not some moral crusade. It was an attempt to foment a rebellion in the South, whereby the whites that were fighting against the North would have their hands full with rebellion. But largely it didn't work because a lot of the former slaves fought on the side of the South. The reason being, well, if you look at the equality between the Confederate and black soldiers, the Confederate white and black soldiers, there was equality there. The Confederate black and white soldiers were equipped the same, they were paid the same, and they fought side by side. In the Union, the black Union soldiers were paid much less, half wages. They did not fight side by side. As a matter of fact, there was a whole regiment, I think it was, or company of Union soldiers that would not even fight, with a segregated company of black soldiers until the white soldiers in the Union were threatened with being hung for disobeying orders. On top of it, the black soldiers in the North were given less in the way of equipment to fight with. So the hypocrisy is all over the place. Now, why did the actual South, I got to go into this because when we're talking about let's get rid of Abe Lincoln off the currency, we got to get into all the reasons what was going on. And first, I just want to state the Emancipation Proclamation. Again, it was to try to create a rebellion in the South. It was not really, because he did not free any slaves in the North where he had control over. The northern states that were slave states that were in the Union were Kentucky, Missouri, Maryland, Delaware. Delaware was one of the last states to free the slaves. And West Virginia, which was not a state at the time, but it was still becoming a state, and it was still a loose confederation of counties. Abe Lincoln did not touch slavery there either. So the war between the states, or the Civil War, or the War of Northern Aggression, actually is probably more apt to be named the War of Northern Aggression, started on April 12, 1861. The Emancipation Proclamation became effective January 1st, 1863, almost 2 years later, by decree by Abe Lincoln, only applying to the South. Anywhere he had power to free slaves, he didn't do it for free one slave. But you saw it, and there's a lot of actual quotes by Abe Lincoln to show he was a complete racist all the way. He was going to deport all the blacks in this country out of the USA after this war was over. The myth doesn't agree with the reality. So why is he on the money? So I mean, we're examining Andrew Jackson. Now I'm going to tell you a little more about Andrew Jackson because there's a lot of other stuff that's going on that they're not telling people. I'm getting sick of Hollywood. But the reason they went to war between the North and the South in 1828, they passed a tariff by the North to protect Northern industry on Southern cotton. The South called it the Tariff of Abominations. It was to protect Northern industries in New England, especially New York and all that, against the South buying more products from the UK, because the UK and Britain was able to ship products over to the United States. Even though they had to ship them across the whole Atlantic Ocean, they were still able to provide products cheaper than what the northern industries could provide them and at better quality. So the South was buying imported goods. So they put a tariff, they imposed a tariff on cotton to protect northern industry. By 1840, 84% of all federal revenue from tariffs was coming from taxes on the South. Okay? The vast majority of federal tax revenue came from tariffs. There was no direct taxation of income, since direct tax on income was considered unconstitutional. Now, Abe Lincoln did put a direct income tax later on in his second term on income, which was later declared unconstitutional. And the only way we have an income tax today was due to an amendment to the Constitution that was passed in 1913, the 16th Amendment to the Constitution. So the South was bearing the vast brunt of taxes in this country. The tax money was being used to build infrastructure in the North, to improve canal building. One of the major canals like they were building canals. There was like a whole heyday of canal building going on in the North. They were using Southern tax money to improve infrastructure in the North, not only with canal building like the Erie Canal, which linked the Great Lakes and all the western fur trade from the Great Lakes and the St. Lawrence Seaway, all the way through the Erie Canal to the Hudson River and then down in New York City. They also used the tax money from the South to help extend the railroads through the North. Those are the main transportation avenues that facilitated trade. Hardly any railroads were being built in the South. Almost all of them were built in the North, and actually that came into play later on when the war between the states occurred. So later on, after 1828, the tariff was lowered throughout the years, but then tensions between the North and the South decreased. But in 1860, Lincoln ran on a high tariff platform. The Morrill Tariff of 1861 resulted in the highest tariffs in U.S. history. Spelling some of these words wrong. Tariffs here, incorrect, but whatever. Sorry. In addition to the cotton tariff, a 50% tariff on iron, and 25% tariff on clothing was imposed. A couple misspellings of the words, but the message is correct. Okay. I'm not a high dollar freaking, and I'm not going to do this over again. Sorry, but let me tell you this about Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson, when the tariff, the first initial very high tariff on cotton was imposed on the South in 1828, the South Carolina was thinking about seceding from the Union. Andrew Jackson, who was also a slave owner, said that he would hang all the ones that are planning on seceding from the Union if they didn't stop all that talk from seceding from the Union. That again is more proof that the reason why they seceded from the Union in the first place had nothing to do with slavery. Andrew Jackson, being a slave owner himself, was said he was going to stop all secessionist movements in 1828 due to the tariff, and he was going to hang everybody that was attempting to secede. And he was a slave owner himself. It had nothing to do with slavery. As a matter of fact, in 1850, they had an act that was passed by the North and the Southern Congress that any slaves that escaped would be returned to the South as property. And the North, later on in the world, when the war started, they ignored that rule, not due to like civil rights or they believed in the rights of slaves. They considered the slaves to be contraband of war, and that they should be deprived of they should be deprived from the southern slave owners. It had nothing to do with helping the black people. I mean, the whole thing is freaking hypocrisy to the max all the way around. So, I mean, history is not what you think it is. Now, a lot of times when people look at the Confederate flag, they see this X and they say, oh, the X is hatred. The X is the cross of St. Andrew, the apostle of Jesus Christ, who was crucified on an X. This is the Scottish flag, by the way, the flag of Scotland. He was crucified on a cross of an X, because he says he wasn't worthy of being crucified on a regular cross that Jesus was crucified on. So Scottish adopted this flag. This was actually the flag of the Scottish Rebellion, and it has been the flag of Scotland since the 15th century. A lot of the people in the South were descendants of the Scottish. That is why they picked this pattern with the X and the red, white, and blue coming from the red, white, and blue American flag. And there's 13 stars. Actually, what it is 11 stars for 11 states and 2 territories. If I get it correctly, let's go back to this image here. We have 11 states and 2 territories. The Indian Territory, which is present-day Oklahoma, and Arizona Territory, which is the southern half of Arizona and New Mexico. Interestingly enough, you got the Cherokee chief, who turned out to be the last Confederate general to surrender, the Cherokee chief, Cherokee Indian chief, Stan Whitey. He was fighting on the side of the Confederacy. Why was he fighting on the side of the Confederacy? Because he felt that the Cherokees would have a much better chance of standing to be independent under the Confederacy than under the Union, because the Union was all about federal power, and the Confederacy was about states' rights and states' autonomy. The Confederacy would have kept Indian Territory. Now, obviously, what happened later on was that they had the big land rush and land grab, and they allowed all the settlers to just come in here some decades later after the war between the states was over with, and this was grabbed and turned into Oklahoma. So it turns out that Stan Whitey was correct. You know, the Cherokee chief that fought on the side of the Confederacy was correct in his assumption that the Confederacy would have gave the Cherokee Indian, it's a much better, American Native Indians, a much better chance of being free and independent and not having their territory messed with, as would have happened under the Union. I also have to state this. You know, when the Confederacy lost, we actually lost the freedoms of 1776. As a matter of fact, you look at some of the knives and weapons of the Confederacy, a lot of times was inscribed on them 1776, because only 2 or 3 generations before, a lot of these Confederate veterans were fighting in the American Revolution against the British. So if you cannot agree with having a revolution against a centralized power imposing 84% of the taxes on your area and taking all that money for their northern area, well, then you will disagree with the American Revolution of 1776, and also even the satellite countries that broke away from the Soviet Union. You'll have to disagree with anything, any revolution out there, period. Because when you disagree with the Confederate cause, you are actually saying the New World Order is correct. Abe Lincoln was a racist and a New World Orderite, if I can call it that, because when you're talking about, um, preserving the Union, what he's talking about there is preserving centralized power, just like the Kenyan imposter, Muslim imposter, is up right now, who's basically a willing, voluntary puppet of George Soros, another globalist. So when I'm bringing this out because people are not thinking other than the little sound bites they get on Twitter, Tumblr, and other freaking social media garbage that's out there without actually looking at exactly what happened in the past. And interestingly enough, this guy, Barack Obama, who's half white and half black, his Kenyan lineage actually goes back to Muslim slave traders who sold Africans to America and who slave owners. That's why he's in with the white establishment to the max, like Soros, who also portrayed his own people to the Nazis, who was actually an anti-Semite, who I can't call a Jew, he's a Jew in name only. I don't even think he even calls himself a Jew. So I'm getting pretty damn politically incorrect on here. I know Google Corporation's going to love this video, as they always love these kind of videos. But, I got to tell you the truth on this damn thing. Abe Lincoln is a freaking fraud and an imposter to the max. It's a whole Hollywood creation. And everything you see on these damn movies about the Union cause is virtually a lie. Even Ulysses S. Grant, the general, he had servant blacks that he didn't pay any wages to. As a matter of fact, Ulysses S. Grant, the main general of Abe Lincoln, said that if he was fighting for the cause of the abolitionists in the North, he would just quit his freaking position right away and not fight for the North at all. That's not what he was fighting for. He said that, Abe Lincoln. Now, Abe Lincoln, General Ulysses Grant said that he would not fight for the Northern cause because he was fighting for the preservation of the Union and imposing taxes on the South. Now, actually, why did they even get in the problem where there was a fiscal problem in the North and also in New York City? A lot of it had to do why they imposed the taxes much, much higher with the moral tariff, and why Abe Lincoln ran on a very high tariff platform. A lot of that came about due to the Panic of 1857, and that was brought about by, you probably heard of the 49ers and the gold rush of 1848, the California gold rush of 1848, when they found gold. There was a lot of Western land movement, people going west looking for gold, but that led to an explosion in speculation, whereby land values went up. People were borrowing money to buy land, people were borrowing money to buy equipment, and what happened is the gold rush eventually petered out, and it also affected the traffic on the railroads. It was taking people to the taking people west, and it caused like an economic boom from 1848 and up through part of the 1850s. But by 1857, the whole bubble busted. Well, they had a problem with a cash crunch in New York City, and they went to ship 30,000 pounds of gold to their coffers to keep their liquidity flowing. And what happened is the ship sunk in a hurricane off the coast of North Carolina. Actually, it wasn't discovered. The gold wasn't discovered again until just a couple years ago. It's still under fierce contention as to exactly who owns it. But that even caused more of a financial panic in the North. So the solution was to back a Northern candidate that was going to impose extremely high tariffs on the South, namely Abe Lincoln. And again, I got to repeat this about the deal with Abe Lincoln and the Lakota Indians in 1862, when Mr. Abe Lincoln, the great emancipator, He's so worried about the plight of the blacks, right? This is another indication the guy's a complete fraud. Um, he was the one that had the biggest mass execution in U.S. history. 38 Lakota Indians were hung at the same time for revolting against being forced to starve. Basically, they were being forced to starve. And when he freed the blacks in the South, he did not free one single black in any of the other slave states he had control over, namely Missouri, Louisiana, Kentucky, um, Delaware, and Maryland, and also the soon to be formed West Virginia state. He was only looking to try to foment rebellion in the South, but it didn't work because the Southern Confederacy treated the blacks as equals in their military, and the Union did not. As a matter of fact, President Jefferson Davis of the Confederacy adopted two black children. And you know what happened when Jefferson Davis was captured? Those children were taken away from him. So, I don't know why the hell we got Abe Lincoln on our money, because this guy's a big racist. Um, was Andrew Jackson a racist? I don't know if he was a racist or he was just somebody playing along with whatever the hell you did back then because slavery was legal and everybody was doing it. But in the case of Abe Lincoln, to call him the great emancipator and somebody for civil rights, it's a complete lie. I don't know exactly who is. Maybe Thomas Jefferson would be more so. But actually, if you really want to look at some of the ones that were far more for pro-black or for civil rights, was somebody like General Lee. General Lee of the Confederacy. He freed his slaves. A lot of Confederates did. So, I don't know. It's a big hypocrisy. It's a big myth. And what happened as the end result, and this is why they perpetuate this myth, is because the end result of the war between the states was centralized authority. And you know what that means? Any agreement we go into in the future, whether it's the Trans-Pacific Partnership, NAFTA, the North Atlantic Free, the North America Free Trade Act or Agreement, or we go into some other thing like United Nations or NATO or whatever, it means we are beholden to the central authority we can never break away again. We, as the United States of America, can never break away with any agreement we voluntarily entered into, just like the states voluntarily entered into the Constitution of the United States and the American government. The states couldn't break away. Now the same principle is going to be applied to the countries can't break away from a global authority. This is why they're pushing this Abe Lincoln myth garbage. The guy was a big time racist, though, if there's ever anyone. And he's a guy that slept with men, which you could probably say the same damn thing with Obama, too, and Herbert Walker Bush. So Google government doesn't like this video, but let me tell you this. I am actually fighting against the garbage from Hollywood, and maybe this isn't such a professional video as it could be, but I can't. I got to get the information out here. You do have the raw information, and you can verify everything I said on this. It's the absolute truth, and there's a lot more to it than that. Hollywood is a damn lie, and it's not just Hollywood is a damn lie. It's all the stuff being pushed on Facebook, because Facebook basically channels what people want to hear. It's also going on Tumblr, Twitter. It's actually happening through net neutrality, another bullshit thing they're trying to push. It's all about centralized power, man. That's what it is. And that's what I think Abe Lincoln really stood for. Centralized power and racism and the superiority of the white race. This is what this guy stood for. So what the hell's he on our money for? You know what I'd like to see on our money? Geronimo. I'd like to see Geronimo. I like that guy. I like Geronimo, Cochise, And actually, any of the people I think the American government owes something to is the Native American peoples that lived in this land. All of them. Too many tribes to mention. Many. Including, the five civilized tribes such as the Cherokee, the Seminole, Choctaw, you know, and even some of the most warlike tribes like the Cheyenne and the Comanche and Apache. We owe something to all those people. And the Lakota Sioux. We owe something to all those people. The Iroquois. I don't think we owe anything else to anybody else because everybody else is a damn immigrant. That's the way I look at it. But Abe Lincoln, he was a, he could have been, his words could have been something right out of the freaking book of the original KKK. Except even that isn't even freaking told exactly right because I think the original KKK was more against the Yankees coming down and exploiting the South economically. Then it morphed into a racial thing after a while. But, the myths are there, and most of the myths are being perpetrated by lies from Hollywood, and people just don't want to get the facts right. And I also want to leave you with this note that, not that I'm really going to give a damn about this, but anybody that's really, really says hateful things about this flag and says this flag means hate, they're a liar and they're a hater themselves. And they are completely fabricating the truth to the max. This flag had nothing to do with hate. It had nothing to do with slavery. It had nothing to do with even so much as some of the people in the South call it like heritage, because this flag did not exist prior to, this is this is the rectangular version of the battle flag. It did not exist prior to the war between the states. It really had lineage back to the Cross of St. Andrew, the Scottish flag, the Scottish Rebellion, when the Scots finally gained, independence in the 15th century, and also to the 11 states and 2 territories of the Confederacy. So there's 13 stars, which is reminiscent of the 13 colonies in the red, white, and blue from the American colors. But boy, you know what? Everybody's been conditioned to think that this flag means hate. But that's how everybody's been conditioned about Abe Lincoln being a great emancipator. No, he ain't. No, he ain't. So, Mr. Google Government, I hope you like this video because it's like I don't have my facts wrong. It's exactly the way it is. Okay? And so, hope you keep it on here, this channel, as long as possible, because I know there's going to be some people out there and have a conniption, but you know what? I got conniptions against them lying about the South, and I have conniptions about them making a big hero about a racist tyrant by the name of Abe Lincoln. Now, how's that?